Welcome, welcome, welcome once again to each and every one of you, and welcome to the Leo and Larry Show, the place that helps you to know the things you need to know and helps you to know the places where you need to go. And we have a great guest right now who does work with communities all over the place, and we've been very blessed to have worked with her, and I'm so glad that she's our guest and will be able to share some amazing information. We have Astrid Caldas, who is the senior climate scientist and also deals with community resilience at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Welcome, Astrid, and just tell some folks about about yourself, your background, and also what exactly is the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to work with you and all the other communities I work with. As you said, I'm Astrid Caldas, and most of the focus of my work at the Union of Concerned Scientists is giving communities the tools, the science that they need to actually achieve their resilience goals. The Union of Concerned Scientists is a science advocacy organization. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan. We cannot do any partisanship stuff. And basically, that's what we do. We advocate for science on everyday lives, both for people, for the environment, for wildlife, for the whole earth to be a better, healthier place. And I am specifically in charge of working with communities and creating that link, that connection between science and the communities. And it's really fantastic. I came to UCS in 2000. Oh my God, 2015. Yeah, almost 9 years, in October 2015. And before that, I worked as a professor for many years teaching about the butterflies, ecology of butterflies. So I did ecological, things like population ecology, and then what happened with my academic career was that I did field work in the forest, and I started noticing a lot of changes. And no surprise to you, you know what I'm going to say. It was climate change that was really changing a lot of the environment and a lot of the things that I was used to seeing in the forest. And that's where my interest on climate change started. I started studying it. I started, looking more into its impacts, not only on the butterflies, but then on, the people, the environment, the economic impacts and everything. And I left academia, and here I am, working with policy and working with communities and putting my knowledge to good use for the people of this planet.
Wonderful. And I want, because we have all sorts of people who listen to this show. We talk about climate change, environmental issues, those sorts of things a lot. But also, when you say you help communities with resilience and their plans around resilience, can you explain to our folks who may not be familiar with that term, what do we mean when we say we want to make communities more resilient? We want to put plans. You help communities actualize their plans for making their communities more resilient. But what is a more resilient community?
Sure. A more resilient community, as I see it, is a community that knows what impacts are going to affect them, are prepared to face those impacts, are prepared to reduce whatever impacts they can within their community through various preparations, including, planting trees, including elevating homes if you're talking about flooding, including strategies like what you have done in your community to obtain water from the panels and,
Right.
these kinds of things. And it also includes trying to avoid the worst of the impacts that climate change can bring. And I'm talking specifically about climate change impacts, resilience to climate change impacts. So it's something that every community wants, is to be able to thrive in the face of climate change. And nobody knows better the community than the members of the community themselves, right? So the people inside the community know where it floods, know where it's hotter, know, they know where the bus stops doesn't have shade, they know where we need trees, and they know, the people in particular who are most impacted within that community, people who are, the elderly people who have some disabilities, people who have health issues. And so it's very important that the community is the one leading this work towards building resilience. And I and other organizations that you work with and that communities work with are here to support you and to give you some of the tools that we agree together that might be useful for you to achieve that resilience.
And back, the connection is so important because communities know the problems, and oftentimes they will, for example, let's say that there's flooding in a city, in an urban area. Every time they get a lot of rain, the streets are flooded and the people don't know why. And so they're just going to their elected officials, and the elected officials may or may not may know where resources can come from or not. But that's why it's so important. And, you know, full transparency, I will call you up, and other folks, because yeah, because the thing is that, like, for example, communities may know right here in the city of Florence, right, or in Britain's Neck, or somewhere else, Louisiana, they're having this reoccurring problem, and they know it's connected to climate change because it only floods on my block. It only floods in my yard when we get a lot of rain or it's a hurricane. Um, and they know what the problem is, but it's like they don't know how to fix it. And that's when the science comes in, because then, we can call on someone like you, and you guys will look at the terrain and the area and can help to make suggestions, correct?
Correct. Absolutely, yes.
Yes. And then even sometimes you might be able to direct them towards some resources, right? So,
Yes, yes, we work with lots of partners and coalitions and universities and other organizations, and one way or another, whatever is needed, we probably will be able to kind of connect the communities with, with who they need to connect with.
yes. Because we have some people right now, I've had some conversations with them, and haven't taken the next step with them because I'm not sure. That I'd stay in my lane. I'm not a scientist,
Mhm.
but I think that part of their problem might be just as simple as making rain gardens on their lawns, as a way of moving water away from their homes.
Mhm.
You know what I mean, right?
Yes, I know what you mean exactly, and I can even build on that a little bit because I'm in my family. We have cousins whose house kept getting flooded from water running from the street, and
Mhm.
they didn't know what to do. Well, it was as simple as building these drains around the house, and now the water goes around the house and does not flood their front stoop anymore. Does not flood their gate area. They couldn't get in. The water was all puddled in the front of the house, and they just you know put
Mhm.
these drains to actually make the water go into certain directions and go into the ground instead of puddling where it did not was not able to go into the ground, right?
Yeah, and then with the rain gardens, you can actually put plants and flowers around
Oh,
there that
yeah. They're
can.
beautiful. Yeah.
Mhm. So you look like you have this little body of water when the water, it may retain water, and then you have these beautiful flowers and plants around there, and it just makes your house look more beautiful. And so sometimes it's just a simple solution as that, and then sometimes it's even larger than that. So we have that, and then another big problem that exists, and we've seen a lot of that this summer, is extreme heat. Can you explain to our audience why is it getting hotter and hotter? Every year is warmer than the year before, going back. I mean, and not only every year, every month it
Yep.
is warmer than the year before, going back how far? How many years?
Yeah. It hasn't been steadily every year, but the hottest 10 years on record have been within the past 12 or so, or maybe the last 10 were the hottest already by this point.
Mm,
So yes, they are not in order. I think the hottest on record was 2016 for a while, and then last year was the hottest, and then the month of July was the hottest month ever recorded in the history of, since they started collecting data. So extreme heat is the one impact of climate change, of global warming, that can be definitely linked to the issue of emissions. Emissions are the carbon dioxide, this substance that the cars emit when they are rolling down the road because their engines are burning gas. It's what goes into the air when people use oil to heat up their houses, when they use natural gas. Anything that comes from what we call fossil fuels, oil, coal, gas, all the burning of that creates these emissions. And these emissions have been proved since the 1800s to warm the atmosphere. The more carbon dioxide and other substances in the atmosphere, in the air that we breathe, the more there is, the hotter it gets. Well, scientists have been sounding the alarm since the 70s and 80s, and the oil companies just kept, they knew it and they kept it under wraps, and they, instead of just doing something, they actually started even disinformation campaign just to try to keep their earnings, to keep their profits at the
mhm,
expense of us. So when we have these emissions is what, when we talk about the United Nations climate change meetings and everything, everybody tells we need to reduce these emissions. We need to move from burning these fossil fuels. We need to move from them to clean energy, wind, solar, hydro, all these other things that do not pollute our air with this carbon dioxide and these other substances that make it warmer. Well, the consequence is what we are seeing, as you said. Every year, every month is getting hotter and hotter. And the explanation has also connected to what you said before about the rain, that we're seeing a lot of rain because when we have a warmer atmosphere, it holds more water vapor. And water vapor is what comes back at us as rain in our area, and it comes back as snow in the cooler, climates. So everything is interconnected. The extreme heat by itself is bad for communities that, many people do not even have air conditioning because they didn't need it. In New England, in Washington State, these people are now looking for air conditioning because it's getting so hot there. So everything is changing. And as a consequence, cascading effects like sea level rise, the water gets hotter, it gets bigger, it expands. the air gets hotter, it holds more water vapor, it rains more, and so on and so forth. So all these impacts are the things that we have to look at to build resilience, going back to what we're talking about, building resilience, right?
Yeah. And you use the word build, and that's where I wanted to go to next, because the people who suffer most are people of color and people who are low income, who live in low income communities.
Correct.
Because you can go in a more middle class neighborhood, a wealthy neighborhood, and you can look at a park, and they have an area where you can walk. They have trees, they have grass, they have bushes, they have flowers. But when you go in a low income community, a park is some concrete, some asphalt, and then you'll see a bunch of basketball courts, some playground equipment, and that's called a park. And there is a price that people pay when they live in communities that don't have much foliage, that does not have trees, and it's related to heat, right?
Right, there is a lot of it that is related to heat, yes. But these communities, as you know, have been the result of a long-standing, racial discrimination and the issue of redlining way back when, certain areas were not eligible for mortgages or were not considered good neighborhoods for white people. And the consequences of those practices and those legislations and et cetera led to disinvestment in those areas, because the people with money, the middle class, the white people, were not in there. So nothing was done there because, there was no incentive, because the people who were there were not considered important. And that's a disgrace, right? I mean, to separate people, based on their income and their color. But the fact there are maps today that show the old red lining and the areas today that do not have trees, that do not have shade, that have a lot
Right.
of asphalt, and the temperature difference between the place that has the trees and the places that do not have the trees and have a lot of asphalt is sometimes 15 degrees or more.
Mm-hmm.
So the
And
impact on the health of the people, not only the environment, the health is terrible.
mm-hmm. And we've actually had people die from extreme heat,
Oh,
having to
yeah.
be hospitalized. And as you said, these same communities, the redlining, for those who may not know, is that the banks used to actually look at a map and take a red grease pencil and draw a line around certain communities to say, we're not giving mortgages there, we're not building brick houses.
Yeah.
People even today live in homes without central air conditioning. They have
Correct. Yeah.
air conditioners in their windows. And if they live on a fixed income, now you're increasing your energy, your electric and your gas bill. And it's such a shame. And so let me ask you if you see this. A lot of times when we work on like building resilience to help reduce heat, folks want to just put more trees where there's walking trails and hiking areas and communities that are already doing well. Have you seen something like that? And there's just pushback because they'll say like, well, there's no place to plant trees in these poor communities. Well, that's because you built the places that way. There's no islands in the middle of the street like you see in wealthier communities. There's not a strip of ground on the sidewalk like you see in some communities where you can plant greenery. And
Yeah.
then they come back and say, hey, we can't do that. That's private property. We can't just go on people's property and plant trees. Have you heard things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I have heard things like that, and they blame the people many times
Mm-hmm,
for the lack of the trees, because they say, oh, we come and plant trees and you're not going to care for them. Well,
mm-hmm,
because sometimes people are out of the house all day long and they cannot tend a garden because they are working hard. Sometimes the, the water is an issue. They don't have the water to water the plants and to maintain the trees. There are lots of things, but these are all a consequence of the system, the systemic racism and discrimination. It's not the fault of the people themselves. The people
Mhm.
are in those environments because of what happened before. And now they are turning what happened before against these people and saying, oh, you can't have it because look where you live. Look how
Mhm.
you live. Look, you can't do this, you can't do that, you don't have money. But what they don't know is that if a community really wants it, the community will do it and maintain it. And we have seen lots of communities, programs that urban tree planting, urban tree increasing, small places like a church or like a community center will actually receive a small grant from some organization and plant the trees and tend to that garden and be very successful in it. But the pushback is real, and people try every excuse they can to not really invest on those neighborhoods because, you know, they say, oh, it's a lost case. We're not going to get anything there, not going to happen. And then it only keeps getting worse.
Yes, yes, and I understand some people sometimes say, "Well, it's not my fault. I didn't draw the red line. I wasn't practicing. I wasn't there when segregation and these racist practices took place." And no, no one is blaming you, but there is a thing called justice.
Yes,
We can't correct the harms of the past, but
reparative, restorative justice. We can do that.
yes, restorative justice. That's the word I was looking for, restorative justice. So if we really care about everyone, we really care about everyone in our city or our town, and we know that heat, extreme heat is going to get worse. And we're Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or don't have a faith, but you believe in justice and love people and love the planet, then you stretch yourself and you
Mhm.
do something that you haven't done before.
Yes,
Even if it costs more money, you do.
yes.
And
Yeah.
so that is something we're dealing with. And that you've seen, I know you do workouts, you've seen this not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's not only the lack of shade and the lack of air conditioning, it's a lack of basic services in many places. You
Mm-hmm.
know, sewers and electricity. I mean, in some places in Brazil where I'm from, people have to make it illegal, hookups for electricity because either they don't people say electric company say they cannot pull the electricity to the house because it's far off or it's not in an area of the grid. So they pull illegally from the street lights. And you wouldn't believe some street lampposts, the amount of wires that come out of one lamppost. And then the authorities just, put on a blind eye to that thing, and then it becomes a hazard, one extra hazard to those people who are already being impacted by lack of so many services. They now have to deal with the risk of a fire or something because of that illegal hookup with the
Mm-hmm.
electricity. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's as we were saying before, it is a consequence of the system, and it's not anybody's fault. And we know that every single person values nature. Every single person values green, a park. Every single person enjoys having that for their mental health, for their physical health, for their, what's the word when you go out to kind of, relax and sometimes
Oh,
I miss words in English.
yeah, recreation.
Recreation. Thank you much, Rev. Recreation. Exactly. Everybody values that. So it's just a poor excuse to not invest, in the communities who are already extremely disinvested.
Mm. And then you have, cumulative impacts. And I was happy to see President Biden last year issue an executive order that talked a little bit about cumulative impacts. So you have communities where people live in low-lying areas because of redlining, where it floods more, and then they live in homes where they don't have central heating and air, so they have the flooding impacts, and with floods can come diseases, and then they're living with extreme heat. And talk about too how a lot of the major highways, because a lot of low income people and people of color live near highways, and where you were talking about the emissions from cars. That's why we're moving towards EVs now, because scientists and the government know we have to lower those emissions from cars, because this is one of the reasons why we have climate change. So you have low income communities like in North Florence and other places where you have extreme, it has a heat island. There's a lot of extreme heat. There's some flooding, right? Where
Mhm.
water just sits with rain, etc., because of the water system. And then they live close to highways. And so let's talk a little bit about air quality issues and the impacts that has on people's health, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not only the highways, right? Because when they built the highway system, the interstate, they specifically built them in areas that many of communities were cut in half by those highways. They were separated, but they just went right through the communities that were the most disinvested, the people who are the low income people, the black people, etc. So they
Mm-hmm.
have already that impact on their community. And we know that community is everything. If you are separated from your community, you don't fare as well. The community gives strength to people. They
Mm-hmm.
are they live near the highways. They are breathing those fumes, the rates of asthma and other respiratory diseases in communities that are right by the highways, particularly those that have very high traffic, is terrible. But add to that the fact that all the chemical plants and oil plants and refineries and everything that's bad for the air and for the health are also built
Mm-hmm.
in those communities or near them. So at the cumulative effect, as you were saying, in
Yeah,
addition
so
to the things that are from nature, that are the flooding and everything, and the rain and the heat that's impacted by climate change, they have to deal with the air quality issues because of how things were built and how things were done. And they still want to do it because they say, we're going to build this new plant and we're going to build it here. Why are you
mhm,
going to build it here? Oh, because the others are already here. And they say, well, but this is going to make the quality of the air really bad. And then they, instead of saying, oh, the air quality, the quantity of this really bad particulate, which is the very small, dust size pieces in the air that are bad. Oh, we're only going to add, it's only the outcome of this plant is only going to be a certain amount, and that amount is not, it's not bad for people. Well, it's going to add to everything that was already there.
you're right.
So,
Yeah,
it's
the plan is within regulations, but you're not taking into consideration the emissions from the cars and tractor trailer trucks and then maybe there's another plant further down the
yeah,
road. So
yes,
don't add everything up, just as long as it's this new facility and within the regulatory limits, they'll approve it and stick another harmful emitter in the same community,
yeah,
correct?
yeah. And it adds up, and that community is probably already way above the limits, for good air quality. But, they put the permits in and people say, oh, it's only going to emit this. It's not bad. It's terrible.
And then you talk about services. So, I mean, we're layering these negative impacts, and people should, I mean, they can literally look in their communities and say, and sometimes it's just a street. It could be a street that's heavily trafficked there, that where a lot of tourists use to go to the beach or
Yes.
whatever.
Mhm.
And then you layer on top of that, where you were talking about services, then layer on top of all of that, there's not a grocery store in the neighborhood. It's a food desert.
Mm-hmm.
And so, on top of all of this, the nearest sources of sustenance are convenience stores that sell food heavily laden with sugar and salt. So,
Yep.
you look
Yep.
in these same neighborhoods, and they have a disproportionate amount of people who have diabetes,
Yep. Yep.
hypertension.
Yep.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, because it's hard to find good, nutritious food in the deserts, in those food deserts. So what happens is, they are actually people are actually by eating those heavily processed foods, they are contributing to the factors that make themselves more susceptible to the impacts of
Mhm.
extreme heat and poor air quality. And again, it's not their fault. There's no investment in the
Mhm.
community. There's no investment in the neighborhood. So they do what they can. They do make do with what they have, and that's all they have. They cannot
Mhm.
travel, 25 miles to find good food,
Mhm.
So
And And I'm sorry, and one of the things that really dismays me now is because we went through 3 years of COVID,
mhm,
and we lost so many people around the world. And one of the things that we heard over and over again, that people were at a higher risk of getting COVID, being hospitalized, and perhaps dying from COVID if they had a pre-existing condition like diabetes,
right.
respiratory problems, etc. And I was like, you're putting this on the news every day. I was like, well, maybe when we come out of COVID, they'll try to do something that to make sure that that we get rid of these food deserts so people don't have pre-existing conditions. So when the next pandemic comes, we won't have as many people who are, have pre-existing conditions that will cause them to get them. Have you seen anything where people are trying to tie these things together? And because I know you work with communities, I know one way is with people trying to do gardens, but have you seen anything major or any idea? Because our listeners, a lot of our listeners live in these communities,
Mhm.
would love to hear some answers, I'm sure.
Well, I know that several communities are partnering, or they're building community groups, and then they are trying to partner with somebody, a local, to get some funding from the federal government to improve their quality of life in the sense of the trees, in the sense of getting a community center where they can have some health care, that kind of thing. But of course, that involves two things. First, the community being able to organize and to have the ability to obtain the technical assistance that the government, federal government, is offering for people to actually apply for the grants and get the money. And then there is the issue of the money coming down, and it comes through various channels, and many times it ends up not being quick enough, or not, fast, not the right amount, or some of it gets diverted into other projects and that kind of thing. Particularly, we see that in unincorporated towns where everything has to come through the county, and there is always another priority other than, that small community. So,
Mhm.
so the efforts coming from the communities are there. We see them all the time, and people are, building community centers like you did. Another group that I work with in Louisiana is, just got a big grant. They were so happy.
Mhm.
Got 56 million grant
Wow.
to build their whole resilience center,
Mm.
resilience hubs across the area where the community. This is an indigenous tribe, a United Homo Nation, and
Oh, the
Louisiana.
Huma Nation. I'm
Yes,
so,
they
oh my
got
God.
a huge grant, and they have these plans, this resilience plan that has
Mhm.
4 phases. And
Mhm.
they got the money, and they are starting the planning and everything. And so the communities, when they can, they do get. I know you yourself are applying for grants, but
Mhm.
not every community has the resources and has even the knowledge of what's out there for them to apply for and to get some money. So the problem is bigger than let's just go and try to get some money to do something here. The problem is also the lack of education in terms of opportunities available to communities directly. And
Mhm.
we how can we reach communities, to let them know about all these things? It requires a huge capacity and a huge workforce for people to actually go into every community. And that's why we need coalitions, groups of communities, people working together to pass on the good word.
Well, I'm so glad that the Homa Nation has gotten those resources. We've been down there as you have,
Yeah.
and they was losing, what is it, a football sized piece of land
Hmm.
out daily, and the houses are up elevated so high you can park pickup trucks underneath the home.
Oh, yeah. It's huge. It's like elevated 15 feet.
Yeah, yes. So I'm so glad that they got the money to try to, well, not try to, but that kind of resources they can do mitigation and resilience and
Yeah.
adaptation
Yeah.
to save their community and the history. But you talked about, one of the things that I found, and you can talk about this some too, is that um, a lot of our municipalities, our city councils, our county councils have unknowingly brought some of these polluting facilities in, et cetera, not realizing the damage that they do and desperately needing, the tax revenue, especially when it's a poor community, a low income community, county or city with not a lot of resource. But I found and they get really defensive when they hear stuff about the problems, and it's like
Hmm.
it's not us. But have you found that there is this huge need to educate not only the federal, because I know you guys do policy work on the federal level and the state level, but also the local municipalities, county councils, city council, they really need to be educated about the harms as well as the opportunities to correct things, because this is where the damage is really being done in their communities. And so have you seen anything, or do you agree?
Yes, I have. The news is not very positive, unfortunately, because one of the big issues is the immediatism, as I call it. People look more at the immediate gains than at the long-term losses.
Mhm.
So if a city is depends on tourism, for instance, it's a small community, a beach community, for instance, right? Well, they are still building, along the waterfront, despite the fact that they know that in 15 years, 20 years, there's going to be, you know, uh, the roads are going to be underwater.
Mhm.
So they say, oh, we're building 20 feet high. The first floor of the building is 20 feet high. Well, how do you get to the building if the street is flooded? I mean,
Mhm.
So they think that, as you said, they need the income, they need the tax income, they need the revenue, they think about that. But one of the big problems is that immediate gains against, long-term losses. And people like to kick the can down the road. They say, well, we'll deal with it when it happens. But right now we are getting 20 million from this new, investment,
Mhm,
this new building, this new initiative. And then down the road, the loss is going to be much more than that, because people start leaving the area, then they lose a lot in tax, a lot in revenue, and then that's what you see, a lot of communities kind of being abandoned by people, particularly the
mhm,
smaller communities. If it gets to a point where people cannot handle the problems anymore and they don't have the services again.
mhm. Yeah,
But
and
you
you
seem
have,
also, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, agree in what you're saying. That states like right here in South Carolina, states actually have resilience programs where they're just like buying out here. We'll give you some money, take this money and go get a house somewhere else, rather than trying to fix the problem. You know.
Yes, yes. But I have seen small communities also where, the mayor and the city council are all for, um, doing what's right for the community, involving the community in decision making. There is this process that started happening in many locations across the country where several community meetings are convened by the local government, where people, talk about what they're seeing, what they're losing, and what they cannot stand to lose in their community for them to continue there, for the community to thrive. And then they identify those assets and those places and those things that are important for the community. For instance, in the fishing village, it's the processing plants for the fishing of the day and the place where they pack things. There is the community center, there's the hospitals, there's the schools. So at the supermarket, they identify these things, and then together they prioritize, and then everybody's involved in the process of trying to obtain, the money, and people, really work together and get involved. But it's hard because these things have to be done after hours, because people have jobs. So they have to take some time away from their families to meet, in a community center, at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, and sometimes stay there until 9, 10 o'clock at night, discussing the possibilities and what can they do and what's the best way to go about, financing this, that, and the other.
Mhm,
It's hard. It's as you know, it's not a simple solution, Rev. It's something
yeah,
that is so complex and that involves so many barriers and so many challenges. And I think that um, exchanging information and success stories across communities would be so valuable for a lot of success to occur in the places that are still looking for it.
mhm. And I think a good example of homes and businesses being lost and communities being dismantled is happening right now.
Oh, yeah.
When we look at the wildfires, I mean, I woke up this morning and they were talking about evacuating, hundreds, thousands of people because the wildfire. I think it was like 3,500 homes and businesses in the path of the wildfire, and then here you have the firefighters bravely trying to stop the fire from reaching, this area. And then on top of it, they're battling the fire in extreme heat. So
Yeah.
can you?
And they're breathing those things. If they don't have those masks on all the time, they're breathing bad air too.
Mhm, mhm. And so let's talk a little bit about that because literally we're seeing climate change impacts every day when we turn on the news. We know it's happening all around the world, but it's home now. It's right here in the United States. And can you talk about some of the big impacts, like what we saw happen with the fires in Hawaii? some of the big impacts that scientists are looking at and that are happening with more and more frequency?
Yes, I can tell you right away off the bat, in addition to the extreme heat that I already mentioned, is something that is directly connected to climate change and has been proven to be the most mostly related, extreme precipitation.
Mhm,
Extreme precipitation, heavy rainfall, the number of events across the country where there is heavy rainfall, a lot of rain falling at once, has increased more than 50% in most of the country. So it's not that it's raining more every day, more days of rain, but when it rains, even in places that are more drought, prone, when it rains more and it rains heavy, and then it floods.
mhm,
Well, the extreme precipitation, heavy rainfall is one of the things that scientists have already looked at and have already shown that is increasing because of climate change. As I mentioned, the air holds more water vapor and it all comes down on us as rain. So,
mhm,
the hotter it gets, the more water vapor in the air, the more rain comes down, and it's coming down more at once than it used to be.
mhm.
Another
And
thing, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead. No, I was gonna ask you for, I was just gonna say, like you said, it's complex because it's like you get all this rain, but then you still have a drought.
Right.
Mhm,
Exactly, because it's a lot of rain. We know that heavy rain does not get into the soil and does not replenish the water table as efficiently as the rain, steady, slow, that soaks in, right? When you get a heavy rain in a place that's very dry, it runs off the surface. It goes away. It hardly replenishes anything. So there's that issue also. And it's hard. Another thing that we have been looking at is hurricanes. The projections back, a decade ago or more, was that climate change was going to impact hurricanes. Not that there would be more hurricanes per se, but that whatever hurricanes formed would have a higher probability of being very strong hurricanes. And we are seeing that. We are seeing not only stronger hurricanes, category 3, 4, and 5, but also we are seeing these tropical storms that are rapidly intensifying. In less than 24 hours, a storm goes from a category 1 to a category 5, just like that. And
in an
that's,
hour.
yeah, that's related to climate change as it impacts the sea temperature, the sea surface temperature, the water, in the ocean gets warmer and that feeds the hurricane, and a variety of other factors that are related also to climate change. So this is something else that we have been looking at very, very carefully. And and sea level rise, of course, we know that it's happening. The measurements are there. It's been going up, and it shows no sign of stopping because the heat is already there and it's already baked in. So we're looking at the sea level rising and the coastal towns and the coastal communities being impacted in the daily lives.
Mhm, mhm. And I folks have heard me say this before. I love to fish, but what I have seen is that the ocean is heating up, the rivers, everything, and anyone who fishes will let you know that we can't catch the number of fish that we used to catch. I used to go to Myrtle Beach in October and with a friend of mine, and we could go 6 o'clock in the morning. By noon, 1 o'clock, we caught 50 to 70 fish a piece. Now I can go all day, and I'm lucky if I catch 10 or 12.
Yeah.
And you would see people driving around our community with fishing poles sticking outside of the car windows, and all these boats attracted attached to trucks, etc. You don't see that as much anymore because the spots and the other fish are staying out in the deep water,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not even coming in close enough for people to who fish from the shore and piers. And the sad thing about that, not for my family, but a lot of people, they live off the fish that they catch, correct?
Yeah. Correct, absolutely. And I know this is a subject near and dear to you, near your heart, and the impact of climate change on biodiversity and species distribution. Plants are changing their distribution. Some plants, some trees that used to not happen in certain areas are starting to show up because those areas are getting warmer. Some animals, insects, and fisheries are changing their range of distribution, where they occur because of climate change, because climate change is changing the environment and is making some places not as good for those species to be at, and making other places now good for the species to be there. So they are shifting, they are moving from one place to another. And and that has, of course, huge impact on the local biodiversity and the local functioning of the systems of the environment. Because if one species comes in and another species is not there anymore, not always the species that comes in is the one that's going to exert have the function that the one that was lost had. So the
Right.
system suffers. Each species has a function in the system. And if one goes away and nobody replaces that function, then the system deteriorates.
And we are a part of that system,
Of
human
course.
beings. And
Yes.
we only have a couple of more minutes. They're flagging me, but I want us to squeeze in something because of a conversation I had with someone, and I was trying to explain to them that as climate change changes what's going on with nature, with insects, with trees, plants, etc., that also is causing a shift and a change in diseases, like the West Nile virus
Yes.
that's in South Carolina. So we're starting to see diseases and in places where we never had them before, correct?
Correct. We're seeing a lot of diseases that are carried by insects, by mosquitoes and ticks. They are expanding their distribution. They are now found in places that they didn't used to happen before, particularly the tropical diseases that are transmitted by mosquitoes. And also diseases for plants and trees. They suffer from diseases also, and some diseases that didn't used to happen so far north, they are starting to happen far north in areas that are not used to it, because nature is used to things, right? Like if you live in a hot place, you are used to the heat. Somebody who lives in Greenland moves to Texas and to Louisiana in the height of summer, they may die. So there's a thing about the acclimation, right? So when the plants that are not used to having a pest on them, they cannot react to that pest, the impact of that pest is going to be much worse and may really devastate the whole forest, because the plants, the trees don't know how to deal with that. And the same with humans. We don't know, our organisms, our bodies are not used, they don't have the defenses, you know, against these diseases that are being brought on.
Wow. And we are running out of time. And
Okay.
it's so great to talk with you. And we have to have you come back because this is not going away anytime soon. But I love the fact that you came on to let our listeners and communities know that the Union of Concerned Scientists and so many other groups that know the science, have research, can help us not only to identify problems, communities know the problems, but help us to come up with solutions and even help with policy so that money can be budgeted for Washington D.C. to help us with these with answers to these problems. So they're waving at me again. So why don't you tell folks how they can connect with you in the Union of Concerned Scientists? And you must come back again soon. I know we're both so busy, but anytime you want to come back, the
Yes.
thing specifically you want to talk about, just let me know, okay?
That's a great conversation. Yeah, so anybody can go to the website of the Union of Concerned Scientists. It's ucsusa.org, and just search for me there. And you can contact me through there, and you can see a lot of the work that we do. ucsusa.org. And I hope to be back. I love chatting with you and talking about these issues that I work with, and particularly informing our listeners and everything, so that they'll know more about what's coming and what's happening.
Okay, great. And as usual, you guys know, if you want to catch up with me, you can just message us at info@newalphacdc.com. Go to our website, same thing, newalphacdc.com. Or you can call me at the church where I pastor, Kingdom Living Temple, 843-610. Oh, I'm sorry, 843 799-0740. So thank you so much,
Thank you.
Astrid, and thank you for joining us once again for the Leo and Larry Show, the place that helps you to know the things you need to know and the places where you need to go. God bless, and we'll be back with you next week.